Progress in therapy isn't always dramatic, which can lead people to think it's not working. So, by the end of this video, you will have a better understanding of what change looks like and whether therapy is actually working, even if it feels boring or slow. So, hi, I'm Jessica, licensed therapist in Austin, Texas, and I help people with sleep problems, chronic pain, OCD, PTSD, and over control learn how to work with their nervous systems rather than working against them. And stick around till the end because I'm going to share the most overlooked sign of progress and why it often shows up right before people decide to quit therapy. So, the first point I'd like to discuss is what media gets wrong about therapy. So, TV and movies make progress look very dramatic. It's big breakthroughs and these big emotional cathartic releases and symptoms disappearing overnight. So people will decide they want to make a change and then some cool music plays and then they make that change. So it makes for really entertaining content, which is the point of TV and movies is to entertain us. But real therapy is actually pretty dull. It actually wouldn't, and in my opinion, shouldn't make for good TV. It's really about slow, gradual change, which I believe is ultimately more sustainable. So I'm actually going to share, there's two examples that I'm going to share to illustrate this point. So the first is actually from the world of personal finance. And I remember hearing a financial advisor share that some of the toughest clients to work with were what he called the windfall clients. So clients who had gone from not having money to suddenly coming into a life-changing amount of money. And it seems like, oh my God, you've got all this money, your problems are all over. But it's a big change to have to adjust to in a short period of time. And there's a skill set to managing money that somebody might not have. And if you're not good with a little, well, now you've got a lot and the stakes are much higher. And so this financial advisor was saying that it's really easier to work with people who kind of build their wealth gradually and slowly, because that gives you time to adjust to these little changes. The other illustration that I want to give, so this is from the world of insomnia. So I always tell my insomnia clients that if I were to plot on a graph efficacy over time of sleeping medications and cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, the graph would make an X. So sleeping medications, those were effective right away. So you get a prescription for, say, Ambien, and you go fill it at the pharmacy, you go home, you take it that night, you're probably going to sleep. It is probably going to work that day. But what people find over time is that the efficacy will decline. Maybe you build a tolerance, it stops working as well. It doesn't tend to stay effective. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, on the other hand, is not going to fix your insomnia tonight. It's not going to fix it tomorrow night. It's going to take at least a few weeks for you to start seeing some changes. But the efficacy over time of CBT-I is this half of the X, where it's not effective right early on. It takes some time. But once it gets going, it tends to get more effective over time. And the effects tend to hold. They've studied people as far out as 10 years. And we know that the benefits of CBT-I can hold at least as far out as 10 years. That's how far they've studied people. So slow, gradual change is, in my opinion, more sustainable than big, sweeping change. Another thing to keep in mind is that insight doesn't always lead to behavior change. Haven't we all had the experience of knowing what we need to do and still not doing it? Like we've all had that experience. And then finally, intensity doesn't always equal true healing because intensity isn't always sustainable or sustaining. Like I believe everything eventually regresses back to the mean. So I'm going to give another example. I'll actually share a link down below to this. There was some research that was done comparing two groups of people. So they were looking at lottery winners, and then they were looking at accident victims who've sustained some kind of permanent injury, like an amputation or paralysis or something like that. And you would think that people who'd had these experiences would see a permanent, like these are like life changing experiences. You'd think that they would see a permanent change in happiness. So you might expect the lottery winners to like get happy and stay happy. And you might expect the accident victims to get sad and stay sad. But that's not really what happened. So initially, yes, the lottery winners were typically quite happy that they'd won all this money. But eventually they tended to revert back to wherever they were before they won the lottery. If they were happy, they reverted back to being happy. But if they were unhappy, winning the lottery didn't permanently change that. And then same with the accident victims. So people would struggle early on as they're adjusting to the paralysis, the amputation, whatever it is. But eventually they adapted and they adjusted and they went back to wherever their previous level of happiness was. So if they were a pretty happy person on average, they tended to revert back to that. But if they were already unhappy, they just tended to revert back to that. It really didn't show a permanent change. And then another illustration is I think about going to these like, I don't know, like Tony Robbins style conferences or events. They tend to be very emotional. They tend to be these very like, again, just like intense emotional experiences. And a lot of the time people might go to something like that and then they're pumped and they come home and they're pumped and they're like, man, I'm going to do all these things and it's going to be great. And most of the time it fizzles out. It's just really hard to sustain like that level of intensity versus, again, that kind of slow, gradual, frankly boring change. So what actually counts as progress? Well, across all the different areas that I work in, sleep, pain, OCD, PTSD, maladaptive overcontrol, here are some of the things I look for. I look for things like less urgency, fewer rigid rules, more tolerance for discomfort, more tolerance for uncertainty, less checking, less scanning, less monitoring. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm not looking for zero symptoms because that is completely unrealistic. I can fix your insomnia. I mean, we can fix insomnia is curable, essentially. I can get you to a place where you are sleeping, but you're still going to have bad nights because everybody has bad nights. Every human on the face of the planet has bad nights sometimes. That's normal. I can treat your OCD. OCD is another, like, again, highly treatable. You can get so much relief. And you're still going to have intrusive thoughts from time to time because everybody has intrusive thoughts from time to time. I can treat your pain, get your pain to a much better place, but you're always going to retain the capacity to feel pain. Like, I can't change that. I can't erase traumatic memories. You're always going to have some memory of what happened. So what I'm looking for is changes in the frequency and or the intensity and or the duration of the problem, not just the presence or absence of symptoms. So not looking for absolutes. There are gradations in getting better. So if you're enjoying this, please consider subscribing to the channel. All right, so let's talk about why progress feels so underwhelming. And here's something to know. Threat is loud, safety is quiet. A regulated nervous system just really isn't that exciting. Like, it feels kind of anticlimactic. I always think about that movie Up in the Air with George Clooney. It came out in like 2009. And his whole thing is that he's like trying to get like airline miles. And I think he's trying to get to like million-mile status or something like that. And he's like pursuing it the whole movie. And then he finally gets there. And it's like the most dull scene. Like, the pilot comes, so like Sam Elliott plays the pilot and he comes out and he's just like, hey man, congratulations. And he's just like, I don't know. It's just I guess he thought it would be more exciting than that. And because it's not dramatic, people think, well, nothing's happening, it's not working. It was supposed to be bigger than this because that's what they show on the TV and the movies. But really, boring is good. Boring doesn't make for good TV, but I think boring is good. Boring is your brain not being on high alert anymore. And when your brain is no longer on high alert, you sleep better, you have less pain, you have more flexibility, you feel safer, things get better. So, my last point that I want to talk about is quitting too soon. So, a lot of people will leave therapy when things start to feel just a little bit better because they figure better is better. And so, they'll leave without realizing that it could actually be even better. Because without the intensity, it feels like nothing's happening. But something is happening. What's happening is that your nervous system's getting quieter. It's not screaming, which is what we want. So it's not stagnation. It's your new normal. And hey, maybe you figure better is better, and a little bit better is better than nothing. But there can be even more better if you stick with it. So you know how that if you've ever been prescribed antibiotics, they tell you to take all the antibiotics, even if you're feeling better. I think because it's prescribed as a round, so it's prescribed as like 8 pills, 10 pills, however many pills, and a lot of people will want to stop taking them once they start feeling better. But really, you need to take the whole thing to get the full benefit. A lot of therapy, at least a lot of the types of therapy I do, are like that. You kind of need to get the full dose to get like the full better. Kind of awkwardly written sentence, but there we go. So if you like this kind of content, in addition to subscribing to the channel, you can also please consider subscribing to my monthly newsletter. I write about kind of all my different topics. And I rotate, 1 month I'll cover pain, 1 month I'll cover sleep, and I kind of rotate through. So I'll put a link down below in the description. And then I'll kind of close out just by saying that if this resonated, then I'm actually going to recommend the next video that you watch is going to be the one I'll do a card where I explain why trying harder actually often makes things worse. It makes sleep worse, it makes pain worse, it makes anxiety worse, and what your brain is actually learning in those moments. So click that video. I will see you over there. And as always, to finish this out, I really hope this was helpful. And thanks so much for watching. Bye.